Reports are emerging that a rift is widening amid growing tension between Prince Harry and King Charles.
Prince Harry had entered Clarence House expecting a difficult conversation. He was prepared for cold faces, guarded answers, perhaps even another painful rejection from his father. What he was not prepared for was the open registry resting beneath the hand of a silent palace official. The page contained the names of the royal family, their positions and their recognized status. But where Harry's name had once appeared, there was now only a clean, deliberate space. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry felt the silence tighten around him. The summons carried the royal cipher, the king's official emblem showing that a message came with the monarch's authority, yet it offered no reason for the meeting. He had entered believing Charles might discuss reconciliation, security, or his children's future. Instead, an official guided him into a room and opened the Royal Household Registry, the internal record identifying who held an active place within the working monarchy. Harry read the page once, then again. He searched for a replacement sheet, a correction mark, an explanation. Nothing explained it. His name had not been misspelled or moved. It had been formally removed, cutting him from the list governing access, briefings, ceremonial standing, and royal decisions. The official kept his eyes lowered, and that refusal to look at him turned shock into humiliation. The Duke gripped the desk until his fingers stiffened. He asked whether his father had authorized the change. The man answered, "His Majesty has seen the final version." The words sounded careful and final, yet Harry heard the wound inside them. Charles had known. The king had allowed the page to be completed without his son's name. Harry noticed the date beside the amendment. 7 days earlier, senior royals had known while he was still arranging his journey, wondering whether this visit might repair something between them. Someone had let him cross the ocean without warning him that the palace had already rewritten his place inside it. A sealed envelope rested beside the registry, marked for Harry alone. He reached for it, but the door opened before he touched it. Charles entered without an aide and closed the door behind him. The monarch looked at the empty line, then at his son. "You need to understand," he said quietly. "Removing your name was only the final stage of a decision you set in motion yourself." Harry had arrived believing he was returning to his father's home, but before Charles could explain the erased name, both men would be forced to confront what that name had once represented. The blank space in the registry was more than an administrative amendment. To Harry, it was the official deletion of a lifetime. It erased the boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin, the soldier who had served under the crown, and the son who had once trusted that blood could survive any disagreement. To Charles, however, that empty line represented something equally painful. The moment a father believed he could no longer protect both his child and his throne. Harry kept his eyes on the page. Born as the king's younger son, he had inherited rank and a place near power. But those privileges had always carried duties and limits. The Royal Household Registry, an internal record used to decide access, briefings, and ceremonial standing, now treated him as someone outside the monarchy's working structure. Charles remained across the desk, trapped between two roles. As a father, he could forgive anger, distance, and even public criticism. As monarch, he had to consider security, continuity, and damage when private matters became public conflict. Every personal mercy now carried consequences for the crown. "Have you removed me from the family?" Harry asked. The king looked at him without moving. "Families are written in blood," he said. "Royal service is written in trust." Harry placed the unopened envelope back on the table. He told his father that the palace had always hidden cruelty behind polished official language. Charles flinched before he could stop himself. The accusation reached beyond this moment, touching years of silence, grief, and choices neither man had ever fully explained. The monarch finally admitted that William had been consulted. Prince William, the heir expected to become the next king, had not demanded the erasure, but he had refused to oppose it. When advisors asked whether Harry could still be treated as part of the active royal structure, the future king had answered no. Harry's expression hardened. His brother had not signed the order, yet his silence had helped make it possible. Charles opened the envelope and pushed it forward. The amendment did not remove Harry's birthright, title, or place within the family. It removed his automatic access to confidential briefings, ceremonial precedents, and private decisions affecting the monarchy. The distinction was precise, but to the wounded son, it felt merciless. "What did I do?" Harry demanded. "What made both of you decide my name was dangerous?" The king lowered his voice. He referred to one private ceremony held weeks earlier, a gathering that had been protected by promises of secrecy. The decision had not emerged from years of vague resentment. It had begun with one unmistakable breach that transformed suspicion into irreversible action. 7 weeks earlier, the royal family had gathered for a private ceremony inside St. James's Palace. There were no cameras, no reporters, and no public announcement. Only senior relatives, trusted officials, and a document concerning the monarchy's future were present. Harry had been invited as a son, not as a working royal. Yet before the evening ended, one confidential exchange would cross a forbidden boundary, reach the outside world, and convince the palace that private trust had finally collapsed. Charles had approved a succession and regency framework that evening. A regency framework is an internal plan explaining how royal duties continue if the monarch becomes ill, travels, or cannot act in an emergency. It did not alter who would inherit the throne. It decided who could receive information, give instructions, and protect continuity when the country needed certainty. Harry attended because the king insisted that his younger son belonged in the family room. William accepted that choice reluctantly. The prince warned both men that no paper, note, or private sentence could leave the palace. Charles heard the warning, but he wanted trust to survive one more test. Harry's anger surfaced when he reached the appendix. His children appeared only in a family section, not within the operational provisions governing emergency responsibilities. He read the wording as an attempt to reduce their importance. The father in him felt insulted before the royal in him considered the practical reason. William led his brother into an adjoining library without aids. He explained that children living outside Britain could not be assigned immediate constitutional duties because they were not positioned to respond during a national crisis. Harry heard only exclusion. He told the future king that he would not allow his family to be erased behind closed doors. 2 days later, the damage became undeniable. An overseas television discussion repeated a confidential sentence from the ceremony almost word for word. Emergency royal authority would remain with those physically present and institutionally accountable. Only people inside the gathering had heard that phrase. William demanded a communications review, a documented internal examination tracing how information reached journalists. The first outside inquiry led back to an advisor who had contacted Harry shortly after the ceremony. No recording emerged, but the sequence destroyed the prince's confidence. Charles still refused to punish his son. Then an officer opened a briefing folder for Harry and found a confidential document covered in handwritten notes that had never been authorized to leave. What had begun as a painful disagreement between brothers now stood before Charles as evidence. And at Clarence House, Harry was about to hear the accusation from the man who had approved his removal. The room at Clarence House became still as Charles removed the sealed papers from the envelope. Harry recognized the handwriting immediately. His own notes stared back at him from the margins, surrounded by dates, security references, and a chain of palace correspondence. There were no courtiers to absorb the anger, and no advisors to soften the language. For the first time in years, father and son faced one another without distance, ceremony, or anyone else to blame. Charles placed the pages between them. A palace folder, he explained, was an official packet carrying private documents for approved royal use. One member of Harry's traveling party had mistakenly returned it to a security officer. Inside were handwritten impressions of confidential conversations, names of advisors, and questions about emergency authority. Harry did not look away. He insisted that private notes were not betrayal. He had written them to remember what was said, not to expose anyone. Then his restraint broke. The palace, he said, had searched for proof because it had wanted to punish him from the moment he left Britain. The king answered with the recommendation made by legal, security, and household officials. Those officials had concluded that Harry could no longer receive sensitive information through the same channels as senior working royals, meaning family members who carried out official duties for the crown. The decision mattered because one careless disclosure could affect state planning, public confidence, and the safety of everyone involved. Charles pushed his chair back and stood. "This was not done because you left," he said. "It was done because every open door became another battlefield." Harry's voice hardened. "Then you chose the crown over your son." The monarch set down his pen. "You kept demanding that I choose." Silence struck harder than shouting. Charles then admitted, through the written decision record lying beside him, that he had delayed the amendment 3 times. Each time, William warned that hesitation was exposing private family discussions to institutional risk. The future king had not forced the order, but he had made delay impossible. Harry asked what finally changed his father's mind. Charles opened another page. A representative acting for Harry had contacted palace lawyers and asked whether the confidential regency language could be challenged publicly. To the household, that inquiry proved the document had already become part of an outside strategy. Footsteps stopped beyond the door. William entered without an aide. He looked first at Charles, then at Harry, and finally at the erased registry line. The wound between father and son was now fully exposed, but the harder collision would come when Harry faced the brother whose silence had made the erasure possible. Prince William entered the room without anger, and that calm unsettled Harry more than shouting would have done. The future king did not glance at the registry first. He looked directly at his brother, as though measuring the distance between the boys they had been and the men now standing on opposite sides of the crown. Charles remained near the window, suddenly appearing less like the monarch who had issued a command, and more like a father watching his family divide beyond repair. William carried influence without holding the final legal power. Charles remained the reigning monarch, the person entitled to approve household decisions, but the heir would inherit every consequence. The Prince of Wales, the title traditionally held by the next in line to the throne, had to think beyond one argument and consider the future stability of the institution. Harry faced him across the desk. He said refusing to object was no different from signing the order. William accepted the charge without hesitation. He would make the same decision again, he said, if protecting Catherine, their children and his future duties demanded it. Birth alone could not guarantee confidential access. Trust had to be supported by responsibility, restraint, and accountability. One careless disclosure could weaken national planning and expose the family members William believed it was his duty to protect. The accusation cut deeper when Harry invoked Diana. He asked what their mother would have thought of two brothers reduced to documents, locked rooms, and security clearances. William looked down. For a moment, discipline gave way to grief. He admitted that she would have hated the coldness of it, but she would also have demanded that both sons face the damage they had caused. Charles remained silent until William disclosed the choice hidden behind the amendment. Removing Harry from the internal registry had been the less severe proposal. The alternative would have publicly reclassified his ceremonial status, meaning the formal position he held at state occasions, and drawn Parliament into a constitutional controversy. Harry turned towards his father. Charles had chosen the private route to preserve his son's titles and prevent the children from being dragged into a public battle. What looked like complete rejection had, in the king's mind, been an attempt to contain the wound. "Can my name ever return?" Harry asked. William answered carefully. Restoration was possible, but not through an apology, an interview, or another public statement. It required one private condition, carried out without advisors and without witnesses. The erased name was not yet beyond recovery, but the price of restoration would force Harry to decide whether he wanted recognition from the monarchy or freedom from it. Harry left the meeting room with his title intact, but his position transformed. The change followed him before he had even crossed the corridor. A private staircase he had used since childhood was no longer available without an escort. A scheduled briefing disappeared from the day's program. Staff members who once addressed him with instinctive familiarity now paused before speaking. The registry had seemed like paper and ink, but within minutes, the erased line began closing real doors around him. Harry felt the consequences before anyone explained them. Removal from the internal registry meant he would no longer receive royal household communications, private family briefings, or planning notes linked to ceremonial events. The royal household was the organization of staff and offices supporting the monarch's official work. Without recognized clearance, his presence could no longer be assumed. That mattered because information created influence, and influence inside the monarchy depended on trust long before it depended on blood. An official met him near the entrance hall. The vehicle assigned for his next palace appointment had been cancelled because the engagement depended on registry approval. Harry asked whether even a family visit now required permission. The man answered that future meetings with Charles would be arranged privately, as contact between father and son, not as access granted through royal status. Harry stopped beside the staircase. A childhood photograph showed him smiling beside William and their father, long before every doorway carried conditions. Anger drained from his face. Clarence House still held proof that he had belonged there, yet the system governing the building no longer recognized that belonging. Memory welcomed, Authority refused. Camilla approached after hearing the meeting had ended. The queen consort, the monarch's wife without independent governing power, did not defend the decision. She told Harry in a private conversation that Charles had remained awake through the night before signing the amendment. The king had read the pages repeatedly, she said, then sat alone after every advisor had left. Camilla handed him a second letter. Charles had written it by hand and kept it outside the official file, meaning it was personal rather than part of the palace record. In the letter, he separated his duty as monarch from his love as a father. He also offered one path back into family trust. Harry read the condition twice. He had to meet William alone, surrender every confidential note, and promise that their conversation would never be used publicly by either brother. No aides, no lawyers, no prepared defense. For years, Harry had demanded a conversation without palace machinery between them. Now that the opportunity had finally arrived, neither brother could hide behind the institution. That evening, Harry and William met in a private sitting room with no aides, no recording devices, and no prepared statements. Their phones were placed inside a wooden box near the door. Between them rested the marked briefing pages that had helped destroy the palace's trust. For several minutes, neither man spoke. The silence was not empty. It carried Diana's memory, Charles's failures, years of accusation, and the unbearable knowledge that each brother believed the other had abandoned him first. Harry understood that this was not an official negotiation. The meeting sat outside the royal timetable, the formal schedule governing the monarch's public duties and approved engagements. Charles would not attend, no advisor would record promises, and neither brother could later claim that the crown had forced a settlement. What happened here would survive only if they chose to honor it. William spoke first. He did not offer immediate restoration to the registry. Instead, he proposed 6 months without confidential institutional material, meaning private documents connected to palace decisions, security, or state planning. Harry could remain in contact with the family, but he would receive no privileged information until trust had been tested, rather than merely promised. Harry admitted why he had kept the notes. Years of competing palace accounts had made him doubt his own memory. Writing everything down had felt like protection. William answered that recording every wound had turned pain into evidence, and evidence into a weapon. If every conversation became a future defense, none of them could ever speak honestly. Harry pushed the briefing pages across the table. One object remained in his hand, a photograph tucked inside the folder, showing the brothers beside Diana. William recognized it immediately. The prince leaned back, and the control he had carried into the room finally broke. Their mother had once connected them. Now even her memory had become something they reached for from opposite sides. William then admitted, in that private conversation, that permanent erasure had never been his goal. He wanted a barrier strong enough to stop another breach, but temporary enough to prove whether trust could return. Harry accepted the 6-month separation and surrendered the notes. In return, William promised that family contact would not be managed through anonymous briefings, leaks, or public retaliation. For once, neither man demanded victory from the other. When they returned to Charles, Harry did not ask for his name back. He asked for one sentence beside the empty line: status suspended by agreement, family bond unchanged. The next morning, the palace would announce nothing about the private agreement. Yet that handwritten addition inside the registry would transform a family punishment into a national symbol. By sunrise, the secrecy surrounding Clarence House had fractured. The public did not receive the private letters, the brothers' agreement, or the reasons behind the decision. Instead, Britain saw a single image: the open royal registry, Harry's former position, and the unmistakable blank line where his name had once stood. It became more powerful than any palace statement. To some, it represented accountability. To others, it looked like a father allowing an ancient institution to erase his own child. To curious, Charles watched the coverage alone. The palace confirmed that internal household records had been reorganized, but stressed that Harry remained the king's son and kept his place in the line of succession. That line is the legal order determining who may inherit the throne. The amendment affected access, duties, and confidential briefings, not bloodline or birthright. This distinction mattered because the monarchy could restrict a role without rewriting ancestry. Yet most viewers saw only the brutal symbol of absence. A presenter called the decision a final paternal rejection. Charles switched off the television before the sentence ended. He placed several unsent childhood letters beside the registry file. reminders of birthdays, school terms, and apologies that had never found the right moment. The king had protected the institution, yet the cost now sat in front of him in his own handwriting. Harry watched the same broadcast from a nearby residence. Advisors urged him to answer immediately, but he refused. Only hours earlier, he had promised William that private trust would not be traded for public advantage. The silence hurt, but breaking it would have proved every fear his brother had expressed. For the first time, restraint became his answer, rather than another accusation. Rain gathered outside Buckingham Palace as a crowd formed near the gates. One newspaper held above the spectators carried the headline, "The Prince Who Disappeared," beside a close image of the blank line. A former soldier stepped forward and left a handwritten card reading, "Service should not be forgotten." The moment captured the conflict dividing Britain. Duty mattered, but so did memory. The palace then released a second photograph. Beside the empty space appeared the words, "Status suspended by agreement, family bond unchanged." The notation revealed that Harry had helped shape the final amendment, turning what looked like banishment into a difficult act of accountability. Public fury began to soften. Charles returned to the registry room and rested his hand on the open volume, knowing the next decision would define more than one name for generations. The world had judged the empty space as punishment, but the final verdict would be determined by what Harry, Charles, and William chose to place around it. 6 months after Harry first stared at the empty registry line, he returned to Clarence House through the same private entrance. This time, there was no summons and no waiting official. Charles stood beside the open volume, while William remained several steps away. The silence felt different. It no longer carried the threat of expulsion. It carried the weight of a test completed. Harry had honored the agreement, avoided public retaliation, and rebuilt contact not as a royal representative, but as a son and brother. Harry had spent those 6 months outside royal life. He received no confidential palace briefings, held no role, and entered no restricted meeting through inherited privilege. Yet he spoke privately with Charles and William, and none of those conversations appeared in headlines or public attacks. That restraint mattered, because trust could not return through promises alone. It had to survive silence. Charles invited his son to stand beside the registry. The royal household registry was the internal record defining each family member's recognized place within the working monarchy. The king admitted that he once believed protecting the crown required closing every uncertain door. Now he understood that boundaries could defend an institution without becoming permanent abandonment. Harry answered without excuses. He accepted responsibility for carrying confidential material beyond the limits set by the family. He did not withdraw his past criticism or pretend the old wounds had vanished. Instead, he admitted that mistrust had made him treat private conversations like possible evidence. That habit had protected his anger while destroying the safety required for honesty. Charles turned to a prepared page. He restored Harry's name beneath a section titled, "Members of the Royal Family Outside Official Service." The classification gave him no working authority, public funding, or automatic access to sensitive information. It did something more personal. It recognized that independence from royal duty did not cancel his place within the family. William stepped forward and signed the amendment as witness. The prince did not promise that everything had healed. Harry did not ask him to. Instead, the future king extended his hand, and his brother took it. The gesture remained restrained, but its honesty carried more weight than any dramatic embrace. The blank line had begun as the cruelest symbol of separation. In the end, it forced 3 men to accept that trust can break, access can end, and duty can demand limits, but punishment must never become erasure. Harry left Clarence House without his former role, yet with something more truthful. He was still a son, still a brother, and no longer erased. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.